Hello and welcome to the Barber Surgeon and You. This is part of an ongoing series of deep dives into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. We're in the second tranche of our core settlement locations, and we're going to be looking at the titular Barber Surgeon. So before we get into a deep dive, I'd just love to go over a little brief history of what's happened with the Barber Surgeon, because it's had a lot of changes over the years. Originally, the Barber Surgeon required you to innovate pottery to be able to then endeavour to create it. It had the same cost, but this price down here was tagged onto a pottery. It had a change in 1.5, from remembering my history correctly, where it became that you would... if you defeated a monster level 2 or 3 Screaming Antelope while you had pottery innovated, you would get to unlock the Barber Surgeon. So they removed the cost, but they linked it intrinsically to the Screaming Antelope, which made sense at the time because the original Barber Surgeon had the Brain Mint, Speed Powder, and the Elder Earrings from that are now on the Stone Circle as a part of it. So things were far more interlinked, and the Screaming Antelope was very essentially tied to so much of the experience. So we had the 1.6 legendary update, and that is where we are now. And I think the Barber Surgeon is in a pretty good spot. It's where it should be. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive around in all of the bits and pieces, but let's start with unlocking and the general thesis. So we'll do the thesis first. The Barber Surgeon aims to provide some disorder protection, a little bit of resource generation, and a place for you to use perfect resources, which is why these are here. These ones. These are all the resources that are involved in the location. And up here we have our linked innovations, which is pictograph and pottery, and we'll talk about those. So the Barber Surgeon is not super high up on your priority list because a lot of what it's making are things that they're not essential to survival. They can help, but you can use other things to assist. So the question of when to unlock the Barber Surgeon is definitely not a precise science. You're not looking at a specific answer that says, hey, you should do it by this lantern year, or you should do it before this, etc. It's just not the case. Instead, my two usual triggers for doing this are based around either the perfect hide or disorder situations. So a perfect hide up here allows you to craft the best, one of the best gear cards. I think it's debatable if it is the best, but it's really close. It's this Scavenger Kit here, and the earlier you make it, the more you're going to benefit from having it. So there's a definite argument for just pushing to get it done, opened and crafted as soon as possible, so the Scavenger Kit can start paying you back. The other reason is if your hunt party has been messed up by some troublesome disorders and a key survivor who's not yet completed their weapon proficiency is in a bad spot, and that's what this is for here. So perfect hide, that's the first thing that's going to make me consider opening the Barber Surgeon. And then disorders like these over here will make me consider it as well. So this is just a selection of some of them, but for example, if you have a survivor who's training axes, sword, spears, daggers, scythes or katars, and they get ichnophobia, they're in a lot of trouble. Apathetic can be crippling as well. Not having survival, that's terrible. We've talked about noisy in the past. This is pretty scary to have. Hoarder can cause a ton of problems as well, as it reduces your resource gain. The further into the campaign you get, the less of a problem Hoarder is, but early on you will absolutely feel it. Indecision is a great way of a survivor getting themselves killed on a hunt, because having to roll twice and take the lower result, well, you've seen what it's like with survival of the fittest. Secretive can massively slow down a survivor's ability to complete a weapon proficiency. It's not terrible, but it can be a bit annoying. And Vestophobia, well, the worst damage of Vestophobia is that you have to archive an armor at the body location when you get it, and that can be really costly. But also not being able to wear an armor set outside of a few specific survivor types with special abilities, that can be a problem as well. So this is not a comprehensive list, it's just a few of the options that could cause troubles, and ultimately that's my 2 trigger points. But this here is an expensive opening cost, and so I want to have a few organs from the organ grinder few organ-based items from the organ grinder that I need, like my first monster grease, my first fecal salve, my first lucky charm, maybe my second lucky charm. That's kind of where I'm like, okay, I've got most of what I want from the organ grinder on the organ front. I can just start looking at putting spare organs after I've been innovating into getting the Barber Surgeon unlocked. So, the Barber Surgeon itself, we're going to start with a look at this endeavour, Trapaning. So Trapaning is the quote-unquote medical procedure of drilling holes in people's heads to let out the bad spirits. We've seen Trapaning in human history for an incredibly long time, and we've seen skulls of people who survived multiple incidences of Trapaning, but of course having a hole drilled in your skull, that's pretty dangerous. Our skulls are so durable and tough and all encasing around the brain for a pretty good reason. So, scary thing, in the world of Kingdom Death, having that hole drilled in your head is a bit less of a concern. You can go out on hunts even though you've got like a direct line from the outside to your brain, but hey, whatever. So, an auger gingerly applied to the skull of the survivor is used to drill through the bone in the dangerous pursuit of remedies by releasing blood built up in the brain. I do appreciate that this highlights that it is dangerous, because, well, I don't think anyone playing Kingdom Death would be like, oh, that's a good idea, let's drill a hole in my skull. But we've seen a lot of stupid things from people over our lifespan, so who knows. The table itself, on a 1 to 2, you suffer the intracranial hemorrhage severe injury. On a 3 to 6, usually the result you're looking for, you'll cure a disorder of your choice. On a 7 to 9, you can cure the intracranial hemorrhage, meaning that if you get the hemorrhage, all it's going to cost you to get rid of the hemorrhage is more endeavours and time and patience. And finally, on a 10 plus, you get this expanded consciousness, you gain a random disorder and 1 random fighting art. So the neat thing about gaining that extra disorder is if you're at 3 disorders already, that can also push the disorder you are trying to get rid of out of there. And not all disorders are guaranteed to be terrible. There are a few useful ones, ones that you can leverage for various benefits. So you're not going to be Trapaning all the time unless you're unlocking that particular strain that requires you to Trapan the same survivor 5 times. Otherwise, you're just going to use this when you need to, and it's a useful tool to have in your repertoire, so don't forget it exists if you've got a survivor who is messed up from disorders and is having problems. So, good endeavour, one worth unlocking, very helpful to have kicking around. Let's just get into the gear now, shall we? So we'll be doing them in the order listed here, and we begin with the first aid kit. So this costs it's a perfect bone and a leather, and as you can see, this is like a lot of green affinities on the item keywords. Item, yeah, it's an item. Heavy, usual concern about heavy exists. If you're worried about heavy, survival of the fittest helps you not suffer quite so much from that. The ability on arrival, all survivors gain 3 survival, is really good. What that means is, on longer hunts, your survival tends to get thrashed, and if you're insane, you've got a very high chance of just losing all your survival when you go through overwhelming darkness. So that's like kind of scary. Knowing that you have an extra buffer of survival coming back in is fantastic, because survival actions are by far and away the strongest elements of a survivor's repertoire outside of their specific gear loadout. Survival actions can be movement or another attack, or they can be like moving bandages, getting somebody up off the ground, avoiding a hit. Survival actions are amazing. Survival is amazing. Then we have an activated ability, which it does half a bandage, remove 1 bleeding, or uniquely it allows you to remove negative attribute tokens from yourself or an adjacent survivor. Negative attribute tokens tend to hit you during the hunt more than anything else. Some monsters might deliver them occasionally to players, and the Kingsman notoriously makes everybody's life really unhappy and miserable by just dropping negative movement tokens. That's really not going to help here at all. Well, a tiny amount, but not really. So it's a nice extra ability, and the biggest part of this is the series of these 4 affinities. So obviously you could drop the first aid kit right in the middle of your gear grid and connect like, oh look, a Scavenger Kit here and a Monster Grease here and so on, and get a lot of green affinities. Now that is actually involved in a particular build, which we will come back to in the future. It's a part of the Flower Knight. That there's a secret fighting art called the Canthus Doctor that adores green affinities, and this is a great central piece. But also, this is a highly flexible item that you can position in your gear grid to just help activate other things. Sometimes, for example, finding a left-facing green affinity for the Phoenix Placard is really tough, but this will just give you it and also has some nice additional abilities. So I'm not going to put my first perfect bone into the first aid kit, but I will seriously consider putting either my second or third in there. It depends how much I want to lean into Zambatos. I prefer to try not to use them too often because I like experimenting with the newer, different stuff. But if I was giving like direct advice, I'd say your first bone, get a Zambato. Your second bone, think about it as backup Zambato in case you break the first one, or first aid kit. And your third bone, if you've made 2 Zambatos, heck, it's time to get this first aid kit going. It's a good item. Then we have the Scavenger Kit. For me, this is one of the top 2 items in the location. It costs a perfect hide and a scrap, which is why I said get this perfect hide. Open Barber Surgeon. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Profit. Again, item heavy. Won't go over that. Same warnings as usual. It's unique, so you can only have 1. Good reason it's unique, and that's because when you defeat a monster, you'll gain either a random basic resource or a random monster resource from that monster's resource deck. So this, picked up early, will effectively pay for itself and the unlocking of the Barber Surgeon in 6 lantern years. And the only downside to this item is that it's heavy. Now, which resource you pick, normally the right answer is the monster resource, but if you're fighting a monster where you've already crafted everything you care about, the basic resources do provide things that you cannot get from most monster decks, like perfect resources. They are not particularly common in a normal monster's resource deck. Or love juice, again, quite rare and hard to get. Scrap. If you want some broken lanterns for something, basic resources will have some in there. So that's the Scavenger Kit. This is my first purchase out of the Barber Surgeon. This is where I want to put my first perfect hide. Sometimes I forget it exists because, weapons and armor are shiny. But the sooner you make this, the better. And I would consider it to be the nearest as a must craft from the Barber Surgeon as it possibly could be. Okay, Almanac. Right, so the Almanac is soluble and flammable. This costs 2 leather to make, so it's a leather Almanac, and the soluble and flammable, they are negatives you want to be aware of. The biggest thing to consider is if you're on the Sunstalker and you've put that in the campaign, it will thrash Almanacs. It attacks both of these two and forces archiving of the item. So just be aware of that. This blue affinity is in a good orientation, so it's a nice little extra bonus. Its main ability is down here, which is giving you 2 insanity when you depart. Protection on the start of a hunt is nice. Going out on a hunt with no insanity at all is quite scary. Plus 2 insanity, often that'll push you to be an insane. So it's not... it's like a good bonus, but the biggest reason you're unlocking this is for the you cannot gain disorders. And one other reason. So you cannot gain disorders is super useful for locking in a survivor who doesn't have, who has what they want, and you don't want to get any more going. And additionally, our dear friend Accept Darkness, which many people like using. I prefer Collective Toil out of the Society Principles, but there is nothing wrong with picking Accept Darkness. It is very good. It has +2 to all brain trauma rolls, which means you can hit on a 10 the 12 result, and the 12 result says if you have 3 disorders, you're dead. So you can use the Almanac to lock in a survivor with 2 disorders that you're happy with and make sure they don't have to worry about Accept Darkness. Now, there is one more hidden synergy for the Almanac, and that is down here in the hunt phase. The big thing is here. So this is mineral gathering, and you get a bonus down here if you have an Almanac. Now, I'm just going to say it's not super important to have an Almanac, because as we walk down and see how much you have to do to get to this, it's quite an edge case situation, but it is a potential lifesaver. So if you roll an 8+ when you've got a pickaxe, you get some scrap, and if you're after Overwhelming Darkness, you're allowed to go any survivor, not just like the person who's scored the hit, but anyone can go down into the worm tunnels. Everyone in there has to roll, and if you get an 8+, then that specific survivor, gets to go to the Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake is phenomenal. It's one of the reasons I don't always want to have a whip, because this 1 to 2 result is amazing. You only really need it on 1 survivor. Once they get back to settlement, you will intimacy it onto multiple other new survivors. Crystal Skin is such a unique and good ability. You can't wear armor, but you get 3 armor points to all locations. You're more likely to die from severe injury rolls because you're now more fragile, but you can still wear shields and other ways of getting armor points that are not armor. So this suddenly frees up your gear grid to as many slots as you want for stuff that's not armor. You may put 1 or 2 shields in there, and then that's it. But on a 7+, you go down to the Lantern City, and this here, this is absolutely terrifying. If you're insane, on a 1 to a 4, you're a goner. And it's also an interesting little bit of world building. If you look at these results, I think it's worth noting that it seems like the Lantern City is long dead, like it's not really occupied, because you have to be crazy to go into this and accept their intervention, accept their invitation to stay, and you die. Likewise, the Forge is cold. So, having +2 down here is an edge case because you have to really beat the odds to get down here in the first place. But it is very helpful because it triples the chances of meeting this lovely tall stranger. This is the Cyclops Knight, having a little wander around as he does. And also +20% onto getting this iron scrap, which is very good as well. So I don't think that the benefits of the Almanac are so good that you should bother crafting it for the express purpose of giving you that bonus down there in the Lantern City. But if you're trying to lock in disorders and keep them safe, or you've even got 3 disorders that you want to protect in your collective toil society, definitely remember that it is a thing, and it's nice to get this little extra bonus. Ultimately, I consider this to be highly situational. It's a case-by-case basis, and there's a lot of other things I would want in my gear grid. So the biggest concern is not the crafting cost, it's not the abilities, it's just the fact that you only have 9 slots, and you can often find a better thing to be put in a slot. Speaking of which, here's the bug trap. So this costs a perfect organ and 2 bone. It is again soluble, so there's a few situations where it might get archived, and its ability is at the start of the showdown you roll 1d10. On a 3+, you add the bug patch terrain card to the showdown board. That is a 80% chance of having it, and this is the bug patch over here. You're very familiar with this. You'll notice the Scavenger Kit adds a little bonus as well, so you can combine the Scavenger Kit along with the bug patch if you wanted to really properly help somebody in the role of like farming. Maybe they're wearing the Screaming Antelope armor set as well. Essentially, it can give you a random basic resource, or it can give you a random vermin resource. Vermin resources tend to either be hide. Crab spiders are great because you can convert them into hide. Or they are other things that have interesting consumable abilities, but the main thing you'll be using them with is cooking. So if you want to lean heavily into cooking and leverage the stat gains that will give you, then you probably want to make a bug trap early-ish. Now, personally, I think the bug trap could do with a little bit of a buff, because 20% of the time, this is just doing nothing for you at all. It's just sitting in your gear grid existing. A few affinities wouldn't go like particularly unwelcome. I think it would help this item really cement a place, because a situational or not always activating ability can be fine if the item is passively helping out in other manners. So again, like the Scavenger Kit, if you hit the bug trap and build it early, then you can pay off, and you should look for cooking to lean into this. Or if you have anything else that requires vermin resources, then it can help as well. But I don't see the point in crafting more than one of these. There's only one bug patch in the terrain deck. So the second one would just be a safety net, and that's a perfect organ, and that's 2 bone, and that's one of your 9 slots spent on something that might not even do anything because the first one succeeded. So 0 to 1 bug traps, that's where I'd stop with it. And that's my main thoughts on when you use the bug trap. Cooking is a very strong innovation, and the cooking event is actually pretty decent and can have some huge bonuses. So the earlier you get a bug trap, if you're planning in your settlement to leverage cooking, the better. Okay, Musk Bomb. So this costs 7 resources. Any kind of resources, doesn't matter what. They can just be garbage that you have kicking around that you have nothing better to do with. In fact, that's probably what they should be. This is a stinky thrown fragile item, so fragile does mean it can break under certain circumstances. Stinky has occasional synergies. All bombs are thrown because they're based on Monster Hunter bombs, so sure, you throw them, that's fine. It has 0 affinities, and its ability is, if you're adjacent to the monster when it draws an AI card, you can spend 2 survival and archive the Musk Bomb to roll a d10, and on a 3+, you discard that AI card without playing it. That's 70% of the time, 80% of the time it works, 20% of the time it doesn't. Now, I think the Musk Bomb might be the worst gear card in the entire of the core game selection. And it's not that any one individual piece of it is bad, it's just accumulation of issues. So again, it has the problem with the bug trap has, that it doesn't provide any affinities. So it doesn't do anything unless you use it. Secondly, it costs 7 resources. Now, you can have a lot of resources in a fairly high level settlement, but 7 is still a lot. Like, that's a lot. Especially if you've got access to the harvest ritual and you could perhaps turn monster resources into useful basic ones. Now, maybe you've got a huge pile of bones that you don't want to do anything with, then you might be eyeing this up a little bit. But here's the thing. Not only do you have to be adjacent to the monster, you also have to spend 2 survival, and 20% of the time it's going to do nothing, and you have to archive this Musk Bomb. You don't return it to settlement storage, you don't not do anything with it at all, it just has a use once per showdown or anything like that. No, it's gone. So there are definitely AI cards that if you see them drawn, Musk Bomb could be a lifesaver. But is it really worth putting in your limited slots in your gear grid? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. In fact, there's so far only been one bomb that's ever impressed me when I've used it, and that's in the Dung Beetle Knight expansion. And that one is quite hard to make. It's unique, which, the Musk Bomb isn't unique because you have to archive it. I'd actually, be fine if it was. But anyway, it's unique. You roll a dice, and it's only once per showdown it works. You don't lose it if you fail the roll. You don't lose it if you succeed the roll. It just activates once, and even has some affinities. That's the model I wish the Musk Bomb was following. Even if it activated less often, Now, there is the neat part of this is you do get to decide when the AI card is drawn. So there are upsides, but there are so many tiny little and moderately large negatives all piling up on the Musk Bomb that I've tried it and it's never impressed me. I've tried it and it saved someone's life, and then I was like, oh, that's neat. And then I realised if they'd had a beacon shield in their gear grid, it would have saved their life as well. So I was like, okay, I can see somebody anecdotally saying, well, I took this into the fight against the final nemesis and I did it at this moment and I cancelled its entire turn and boom, sure. So you can achieve stuff with it. I just don't see the point. I would rather have a bomb that was once per showdown, and didn't archive itself, and maybe worked a bit less often. I'd be fine with that. Maybe if instead it said, if adjacent to the monster, spend an activation, the next time it draws an AI card, you may spend 2 survival and archive the Musk Bomb. So I don't know. I just wish this was something more than it is. And I just don't use it. I just do not use it. Finally, we have our 3 charms. Now, these require pottery in order to be able to make them. They all have a similar style, so they require 1 perfect resource of the matching type. So blue is organs, red is bones, and green is hide. And they also all activate on a 6+, and they all provide a matching affinity of the type that the resource is roughly linked to. So organs tend to link slightly to blue stuff, bones to red, and hide to green. I'm going to talk about all 3 of them in general terms, and then I'll get to the specific case by case with each. But the key things to note: jewelry and fragile. So jewelry in particular, remember that white lions like to collect jewelry, so just be aware of that. It would suck to lose one of these and not get a replacement. Fragile, there's nothing you can do about. If it happens, it happens. On the affinity front, all of these affinities are great, and one of the things you can actually do is craft these just for the express purpose of getting access to an additional affinity in your gear grid. because a whole affinity can make a huge difference. There's a lot of armour sets that struggle to get a third green to fully activate Monster Grease, but the green charm can just offer you that. Even if you don't activate its full ability, an extra affinity, that can be worth a slot. That can be worth the Perfect Hide. It's not something I would be doing quite often, but for certain builds, if you're struggling to get that final affinity to really kick it off, this is a way you can manage it. And it's rare that you can get a full whole affinity from a single thing. So that's an edge case use. Now, additionally, they all have this 5 affinities in your gear grid activated ability. I'm going to go through each one in turn and discuss them, and we should be able to see how I prefer to use them. So we'll start off with the blue charm. This is our perfect organ. Unshakable is when you draw a trap, you roll 1d10. On a 6+, you discard the trap and reshuffle the deck. So just to note, this is shorthand for you discard the trap into the discard pile and you shuffle everything in. So the discard pile goes back in, but any hit locations you currently have out as a part of that attack, they're still there. So you get to hit a trap and get the benefit of refreshing the deck without having to pay the price of whatever penalty the trap is looking to deliver to you. This is similar, but not exactly the same as Spear Specialization, and it also works alongside Spear Specialization. So I've got a build down at the bottom that we'll look at that does that. It attempts to leverage you going, I've got 2 rerolls on the trap, so I can get refreshes on the deck without being punished too hard. The red charm, which costs a bone, has the unstoppable ability, is when you attempt to wound. Instead, roll 1d10 on a 6+ you wound. So this pushes your attacks into a range I'm not 100% comfortable with. I don't like 50%, I prefer 60%. And it also disables your ability to critically wound. But, and this is a big one, whatever weapon you're using, it scales perfectly for the rest of the game. It doesn't matter if the monster you're attacking has 6 or 8 toughness or it has 30, you're still wounding on a 6+. And that does have some value. So I have a build that we'll be looking at with this as well that uses all cool game stuff. So it does have a place in the game, and it can be quite impressive. It's also a lot of fun for people who like to roll buckets of dice, because you can use a high-speed weapon that normally has a sus amount of strength, and instead, wham bam, you can just like improve it. And that does do things that really can matter. And I'd also like to say I love this icon. The artwork on the red charm is like easily my favourite. I think it's gorgeous. Last up we have the green charm, which gives you undeathable. If you would die, you roll 1d10. On a 6+, you inexplicably survive. So you suffer the death, but you survive it somehow. And this of the 3 is probably the weakest of the abilities. You don't really want to be dying in the first place, and you could use Dried Acanthus to ignore most things that would kill you. Admittedly, Dried Acanthus will trigger on your first severe injury, whereas the green charm will just explicitly work on a death. So you can construct some builds, especially with access to Gormant Armour, where a survivor is kind of playing really reckless and looking to take damage and reflect that back onto the monster, and has the green charm as a backup to avoid dying. The other kind of build that uses it is the aforementioned Flower Knight based Acanthus Doctor build, because they like having green affinities and they're going to have enough to activate the green charm all the time. I'm not big on that, I'm not super high on doing it that way. I think of the 3, the green charm is the one I craft the least, and that's the reason I'm not going to have a build for it, because it's very basic, but it is the one that helps Monster Grease get active, so it has value. So my tier order is exactly in the list they are here. I think the blue charm is the best, the red charm is the second best, and the green charm takes 3rd place. I promised builds though, so shall we get over to them? Okay, right, here we are. We're going to start with our spear build. So this is using quite a late game item from the core game. It is always a bit of a stretch to get to 5 blue affinities with just the core game stuff. It gets easier with expansions, but here we actually have a full armor set, so we've not had to compromise on that at all, and we have a crest crown active doing the work. So when it comes to spears, you can use a bunch of different spears to back this up. The Finger of God here is pretty decent, but if you're in the fully in the end game, you may want to instead. Whoa, there we go. I need to. There we are. Forgot the button. You could run a lantern glaive instead. So this is a fair possibility. There's some other ideas for good blue affinity items that you could be using. Ultimately, I wouldn't want to be using this too often, because if you've killed a level 3 Phoenix, you're probably fighting monsters that deal a bit more damage than this build could take. So it is more here as kind of an idea to allow you to see how you can break a set apart and not connect it in a pretty fashion to get those affinities going. I will briefly mention that the Gambler's Chest now has a armor set that's called Clothed and Satiated, that effectively gives you 1 armor point to all locations as long as you have at least 3 pieces of armor in your gear grid. I'm mentioning it here because I think it's a really good piece of design, and it goes a long way towards fixing some of the issues that happen with armor sets, that you have to make armor sets. Instead, it's letting you mix and match things, or break an armor set or partially build it and get some kind of benefit to your armor points. So that is a really good card. It's not relevant here at all, but I did want to call it out as a piece of design I thought was fantastic. So one example here, the best version, which I can't demonstrate right now, is using Cycloid Scale Armor from the Sunstalker. That has loads of blue affinity, so it can easily activate the blue charm. It doesn't even need the lucky charm, and it also has a neat ability that can make whatever weapon you're using stronger by giving it sharp. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well if you own the Sunstalker. Then we have here, this is a lot more early game. Here is our red charm build. This one's a classic. This is an oldie. Many people have used this in numerous places throughout the People of the Lantern campaign. It's taken advantage of the fact that the Bone Dagger very neatly fixes this pattern layout here, and you get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's a second Bone Dagger in here because it's cheap, and the only things that matter for your weapon are the speed and the accuracy. The strength is irrelevant. You could put a counterweighted axe in here instead. The main issue is that up-facing reds are quite rare in the core game, so you may find better options in an expansion, but paying 1 bone to do this is pretty decent. And then you've got space in this particular build to put in a shield. You could have a round leather shield and then a beacon shield to help the set itself keep pace. I have used this against the final nemesis boss of the People of the Lantern, and it was perfectly fine. They didn't last a super long time because their armor points got shredded, but it was fun, and having built it so early on in the campaign, it did free up a lot of resources for me to direct at other survivors, knowing that I always had this little meme lord kitty cat working hard. And that's it. That's the Barber Surgeon. In my opinion, it is something you should unlock in just about every campaign for its ability to handle disorders. The Scavenger Kit is a standout best item there. I think the blue charm is the second best, and the first aid kit is the third best, and then I would put the red charm in fourth, and the bug trap in fifth, but I do appreciate how the bug trap can help you really leverage cooking. So next time you go to the Barber Surgeon for a haircut and maybe a little off the tip of your ear, remember that it exists, and otherwise, happy hunting.